and it's their intrinsic
nature. This food basically
sound feasible, sound like around that. But here's the thing. This is the problem. The reason why people are reading Deuteronomy and thinking it's the real thing and thinking that, the whole Hebrew Israelite doctrine has to be true is because they are thinking that Deuteronomy is the same as the original Bible when it's not. So people are reading the Bible. They read in Deuteronomy 28 and they are thinking that it says the exact same thing that Moses wrote when he wrote the Torah, when he wrote the 5 books. So they think it's the exact same thing as the ancient manuscripts. They think it's saying the exact same thing. So of course, when you read Deuteronomy 28 and you read from 45 to 49, and you read all of the parts that's talking about slavery, you would read that and you would think, wow, they wrote that way back in ancient times. They wrote that way before slavery happened. So they knew it's prophecy. They knew what was going to happen to us. And it's describing exactly what happened to the African Americans in America as far as slavery. So it's some kind of prophecy. But as I said, the problem is this is not so. And if you don't do any research, you're not going to understand what took place and what happened. And I'm going to go through the history of this because I have to do it in order for you to understand what happened. Now, remember, we do not have the original 5 books of Moses. We don't have the originals. We don't have the original New Testament. We don't have the original Old Testament. We don't have any originals. We have copies of copies, and all of these copies are different from each other. All of the codices are different from each other. So understand, like, these Hebrews are using the King James Version. Most of them subscribe to the King James Version. The problem is you want the Old Testament in its original Hebrew. And that's been a problem over the centuries, trying to get the Old Testament to fit what it originally said. And so many people, so many scholars and kings and rulers have put time and money into trying to get the translation correct for whatever reason. I'm going to go into that later. But as it stands today, the oldest complete copy of the Old Testament in Hebrew is the Leningrad Codex. The Leningrad Codex is the oldest complete Old Testament in Hebrew. Now, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls is older than the Leningrad Codex. It's much older than the Leningrad Codex, but the Dead Sea Scrolls is not complete. The Dead Sea Scrolls is in a lot of pieces. Now, the Aleppo Codex used to be the oldest complete Old Testament in Hebrew, and as a matter of fact, the Aleppo Codex is actually a better quality codex than the Leningrad Codex. But in 1947, it disappeared because the UN established a Jewish state in Palestine, and there was a rebellion that went on there. There was a riots that went on there, and it disappeared, and it didn't turn up until like 1957, 1958, and it was missing a lot of pages. Then the Leningrad Codex became the oldest complete Old Testament written in Hebrew. Now, as I said before, a lot of Hebrews do not reference those codices. They stick to the King James Version. And when I point these things out later on and show you how the King James Version is different, you can see where Deuteronomy is going to be different. But it's a lot of history that goes with it for you to understand where I'm coming from. So I'm going to get into that. Now, as I said, I don't have a problem with the Hebrew Israelites being black. I don't have a problem with Jesus being black and all that. But I have a problem with King James being a black man. Now, I understand for the Hebrew Israelite doctrine that he has to be black, because then you would say, well, a white man gave us the King James Version. But to refute all that, they say, well, King James was a black man. They have to, they doctrine depends on King James being a black man, because then every black person can say, well, that doctrine came from a white man. King James was a white king. Look at his mom. Look at his dad. They was white. They were Scots. He was white. But that he has to be black in order for the whole Hebrew Israelite doctrine to work. But then you have to ask yourself a few questions. Why would they accept the doctrine of a black man when they are enslaving black people? If, according to the Hebrews, if he was a Hebrew, if he was an Israelite, King James, why would they accept his doctrine? Why would they accept the doctrine of this black man, these white people? Then later on, why would they hide the fact that he was black? Now, when you look up King James, they obviously do not tell us that he was a black man. When you see the pictures, he's a white man. When you see pictures of his family, they are white, his parents are white. They are obviously hiding the fact that he was black, if he was black. But why would they go through the trouble of hiding the fact that he was a black man, but then turn around and give us his doctrine and say it's the truth? If they hide the fact that he was black, then they're trying to deceive us. So why would we expect them to give us any truth in his Bible? Why would we expect that? So if the Bible was saying, and the whole Hebrew Israelite doctrine is saying that we would be enslaved to our enemies, so that's this white man, our enemy, why would we expect our enemy to give us the truth? Now, regardless of what you want to say, that King James is a black man and he wrote the Bible, who distributed the Bible? Who passed that Bible throughout America? Who got that Bible around? It wasn't us. It wasn't black people. It was the white man. A black man did not invent the printing press. Black people did not own these printing shops and these companies around America. They was owned by white men. They could have changed the text at any time. King James died, soon after the King James Version came out. I think it was 1620 or 1620 something. But why would we expect them to give us any truth? Now, the Hebrews walk around all day saying, the white man is the devil. The white man is the devil. Well, why would we expect the devil to give us any truth? Why would we expect them to care about our soul so much and to care about us understanding who we are to give us the truth in the King James doctrine, but then not tell us that King James was a black man? Now, this raises even more questions when it comes to the Bible itself and this whole issue of color. But this is what I was talking about early in the video. It raises too many questions for Jesus to be black or white, Moses to be black or white, and them not definitively tell us. Now, there are a few instances in the Bible when it describes something as being black or white. Now, we know that the Romans were white, we know the Greeks was white, and according to the Hebrews, the Israelites were black. So if these are supposed to be eyewitness accounts, we know it's supposed to be eyewitness accounts of Jesus' crucifixion. So they could see that Jesus was a black man and the Jews were black, but the Roman soldiers had to be white, that the Greeks were white. So why is it not a definitive description of black and white in the Bible? Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, color don't matter. Maybe they didn't want to make a point of color. Well, if the Hebrew Israelite doctrine is saying that the white man is the devil, then we need to know who the white man is. Who was white? Who is black? We need a description of who is who. But you have to understand that the Bible was created to deceive people. It was created to justify slavery, to justify war. So you cannot put Jesus as black. You can't put Jesus as white. And let me explain why. The reason why you can't definitively put Jesus as a white man, because most people will say, well, why didn't they just say Jesus was white in the Bible? If they wrote the Bible, if they wanted to control us with the Bible, if they wanted us to worship a white God, why would they not just say definitively in the Bible that Jesus was white? Now, we grew up with all these images of a white Jesus everywhere we went. They pounded a white Jesus in our head. You look at Passion of the Christ. Jesus was a white man. He looked at white to me. So they've been pounding a white Jesus in our head. So why not definitively put in the Bible that Jesus was the white man? Now, the reason why they cannot do that is because science is going to prove it wrong. Science is going to come along and say, well, there's no way in the world he could have been white in this part of the world. There's no way in the world his line could be white, because we know from a scientific fact that black people was here long before white people. And then that would completely destroy the Bible, would completely cripple it, if you say definitively that Jesus was white. Now, the reason why you can't say definitively that Jesus was black either is because if you have a plan in place to enslave the masses of black people in Africa, if you have a plan in place to steal our history, to steal our knowledge, to keep us in poverty and out of power for hundreds of years, You can't turn around and have white people worship a black God and expect them to follow your plan. Because if they bowing down and praying to a black God in their time of need, they're going to feel guilty about what they're doing to black people, and they're not going to want to go through with it. They're not going to sit by and let the things happen to us that have been happening to us over these years and then pray to a black God. They would not be able to do it. So you can't say definitively that Jesus was black either. You have to leave it up to interpretation. Now, when you look at it, they have already basically told the world that he was white without having to put it into the doctrine. With the power of motion pictures. So when we look at these movies and we see Jesus being played by a white person, Noah is white, Moses is white, the ancient Egyptians being played by white people, we can't go to them and say, well, science says that there's no way that Noah could be white, because science tells us that black people came before white people. Then they can say, well, it's just a movie. It's just a movie. It's just a person who we got to play a role. But they still get to put into the minds of the masses of people that God is white, Noah is white, Moses is white, and get around the whole problem of the Bible not definitively mentioning Jesus being black or white. And they get to take advantage and cast themselves as being the image of God. The Bible is supposed to be eyewitness accounts. We're talking about prophecies, predictions from the future. Revelations is a prophecy about the future. It gives a description of Jesus Christ, but it does not definitively tell us if he's black or white. It leaves it up to interpretation. Hair white like wool, feet like brass in a burning furnace. This is not a description. This is bullcrap. This is playing games. Now, if you have a prophecy about our future, then you understand that in our future, in our time, we describe people as being black or white. So to not definitively say that Jesus was a black man, Jesus was a white man, shows deception. And you can't say that, well, maybe they didn't want to put a definitive description because they didn't want it to be about color or race. But we know in our future, we know now today that the white race have definitively taken the image of Jesus Christ and cast him as a white person. And you have more people believing Jesus is white than black. How is that truth? If the Bible wanted to give us truth, it would have told us definitively that Jesus was black, definitively, to take away from somebody taking the power of putting the image of Jesus Christ in their race, of their color. Now, the Great Schism was basically where you get the separation of Christianity and Catholicism, because they basically couldn't agree. They couldn't agree on the source of the Holy Spirit, and they definitely couldn't agree on the Pope having universal jurisdiction over the whole religion. They couldn't agree on it. So this is where the separation occurred. So now this is going to bring me into the whole King James part of it. I don't have nothing to say about him being, bisexual or homosexual or anything like that, because he had 2 kids. So he probably was bisexual, but that's besides the point. The whole thing is this. It really begins with the whole Protestant Reformation. That's when this whole thing really starts, and what led to the creation of the King James Version. Now, the Protestant Reformation began in 1517 somewhere in Germany. Now, the Protestants basically wanted to get rid of any remnants of Roman Catholicism inside of certain churches. So now understand that Rome ruled Great Britain from 43 AD to 410 AD. But after the whole thing was over, they still had control over the Church of Great Britain for a while. Now, when King Henry VIII came along and assumed the throne, he couldn't get a male heir from his wife. So he wanted a divorce. He wanted Pope Clement to give him a divorce from his wife because she couldn't provide him with a son. They had a daughter. So now when Pope Clement didn't grant him his divorce, he passed 2 laws. The first one was in 1532 with the submission of the clergy. Now, the submission of the clergy basically said that they could not change any laws or make any rules without permission from the king. Then in 1534, the Act of Supremacy was passed, which basically said that they would take all the taxes that they were sending to Rome and make those taxes from the church payable to the crown. And also, nobody could basically ask Rome for anything, whether it had to do with religion or otherwise. It was forbidden. So you couldn't even talk to Rome and say anything to Rome Nobody from the Church of Great Britain could talk to Rome under these new laws. So once these things was passed, the Protestant Reformation got in there and was saying, you know what, we need to get rid of any remnants of Rome. So in 1539, King Henry VIII gave us the Great Bible. Now, it was prepared by some Protestant scholars from England. Now, some of these same Protestant scholars from England later went to Geneva, Switzerland, and they created the Geneva Bible in 1560. Now, remember, the Geneva Bible was the one that had the annotations. They had the writings that was on the side, basically the commentary that was talking about the Bible. And the Geneva Bible is also the Bible that named the Pope as the Antichrist. So now a lot of the ruling elite in England, who was under Queen Elizabeth I, they didn't like the annotations in the Geneva Bible. A lot of people didn't like the Geneva Bible because they said it was being too honest. It was giving away too much. So in 1568, Queen Elizabeth I gave us the Bishop's Bible. It was revised in 1572. So then in 1604 is when King James convened the Hampton Court Conference because the Puritans had a problem with Queen Elizabeth's Bible. A lot of people was concerned with the translation from the Hebrew. A lot of people didn't believe it was a good translation. They didn't believe that the Great Bible by King Henry VIII was a good translation of the Hebrew. So understand what's taking place here. You basically had, once the Crusades started, you had Rome going out and wiping out the churches who was not accepting the Pope as having universal jurisdiction over the Bible, over Catholicism, over Christianity. Wiping these people out who didn't accept certain terminologies that, or certain rituals that the Catholic Church was using and things they was doing. You know, where the Holy Spirit comes from, the whole divinity of Jesus. So many different things they disagreed upon, which caused the Great Schism and that big divide. So now when you go to King James, you look at how the King James Version came into place, it had nothing to do with somebody laying hands on King James and, you know, King James being filled with the Spirit or being an Israelite or anything like that. It had everything to do with them trying to separate from Rome. This is what the Protestants was doing. This is what the Puritans was doing. It was going out and trying to eradicate any traces of Roman Catholicism from churches. Because you can't sit up there and say, I'm a man of God and God this and that and Jesus this, and you're going out and you're killing Christians. You can't do that. So a lot of people didn't accept Rome. So understand, the whole thing with the King James Version was to separate themselves from Rome. So in doing that, they obviously changed the doctrine. So we know that in Catholicism, they had to do the canonical books. They have Maccabees. They have all those 7 books that the King James Version do not have. They left them out, saying that they were never written in Hebrew and it was only written in Greek, so they shouldn't be a part of the Bible, which is why the deuterocanonical books are not in the King James Version, but are in the Catholic books and in the old books. So now their whole thing was these things was never written in Hebrew. They wasn't written in Aramaic. And of course, back then they could not know. So what the Hebrews will tell you is God put a spirit on King James and on the translators to get a perfect translation of the Bible, and that they used the Masoretic text, or they used Textus Rescriptus, or they used some kind of Hebrew codex or manuscript so they would get the translation correct. They didn't use what the Romans was using. Now the thing is, they always say that, you know, the King James Version is just like the Dead Sea Scrolls. But guess what? The King James Version does not contain the Deuterocanonicals. It doesn't have it in it. It doesn't have Maccabees. But the Dead Sea Scrolls does. The Dead Sea Scrolls has the Deuterocanonicals. It has Maccabees. It does not have a book of Esther. So how could the King James Version be like the Dead Sea Scrolls when the Dead Sea Scrolls have those books and the King James Version does not? You would think, not having those 7 books in there, including the prophecies of Daniel, the extra prophecies, those extra books that was in Daniel and some other books, you would think that would dramatically change the Bible, and it obviously has. So the whole thing is, what was going on was the people, when they was writing these Bibles, look at all the people who wrote Bibles after the Crusades. You remember, Rome was basically taking over Christianity everywhere. They were saying, you know, you can't translate it from Latin. You can't do this. You can't write it in English. Remember, John Wycliffe, John Huss, Remember all the people who was killed for translating Bibles, burnt at the stake for what they was doing. This was Rome doing this. They didn't want nobody to change anything. But you had England, you had other places who was changing these Bibles. They was taking out things that they didn't agree with Rome on, and it was changing the books. So it's not like what Rome had. But this is the thing that people are not remembering. Where did all this stuff come from? It came from Rome. So if we change anything that they did, you are changing what is close to the original. So I don't understand when you look at that, when you let common sense set in. I mean, everybody rushed to believe when they read Deuteronomy 28, not thinking. Common sense should tell you. This dude wrote that book, your King James Version, where it's talking about all this stuff with slavery. And as I said in the video, I'm not going to deny, I'm going to say 100% for certain, yes, Deuteronomy 28 is talking about black slaves in America. No way around that. Deuteronomy 28 do not fit the white Jews. It don't fit these Ashkenazi Jews. It don't fit no other people but us, but African Americans. There's no way around that. So people want to look at that and get all holy and say, oh my goodness, it's real. And, you know, they knew about this stuff. And how did they know? Not fathoming common damn sense. Dude, he wrote the book between 1604 and 1611. Slavery was already in full swing.